Today's episode of Well Then, we're going to talk about Ayurveda versus Western science. Now, this prompt or this story is actually coming from real life. I recently posted a story of talking about almonds and how you should soak them and the Ayurvedic benefits of soaking them. And I got this really thoughtful response from someone who said, my grandmother, and this woman is also South Asian, she said, my grandmother has always said to soak your almonds and that it's much better for you. But when I look at Western science, there's so much benefit in the almond seed skin. So why remove the skin? And she sent me some research papers that showed, that almond skins contain antioxidants, they contain polyphenols, and other antimicrobial, antibacterial qualities. And so there's so much benefit to eating the skin. Now, my response to her was, yeah, I kind of get it, because I've been in the situation where you're like, well, one says one and the other says something completely different. How do you marry them up? So the way I like to think about it is first taking a step back and looking at the way each system looks at its constituents. So in Ayurveda, it looks at the whole nature. It thinks about the complete holistic self. In Western science, it's kind of about like slicing and dicing and looking at individual components and getting detail on each of those. So when you take a step back and you think about from a nature perspective, which is what Ayurveda is grounded in, it's grounded in connecting to nature, being in tune with nature. What is an almond? An almond is truly a seed. And what happens to a seed? When a seed is ready to grow, well, first of all, it's probably went through a few seasons of cold winters. It needs to be protected from its environment. It's only ready to grow when it's spring, when the environment is moist and warm. And that's kind of like what's happening when you are soaking an almond. You are trying to remove this protective layer. And it makes sense from a Western perspective why all these qualities are here. You want this skin to have antioxidants in it to protect against sun damage, right? We all know from Skin to Care the importance of antioxidants. But you want it to be antifungal and antibacterial, because then it can withstand its environment. And then when it's ready, the beautiful nutrient-rich inside can grow into a sprout and grow into a tree. So that's kind of how I think about these two systems. There's individual sort of lenses that are individual sort of slicing and dicing that Western science does, and Eastern sciences like Ayurveda look at the whole system and how it works with nature. So I hope that kind of gives you a perspective of how you can think about the two. Now, I will go into more detail in my deep dive, which you'll see on YouTube. Okay, so let's take this conversation a little bit deeper in terms of how Ayurveda, a system from the East, compares to our modern science, which comes from the West. Now, for a little context, these are spaces where I have a lot of experience in both. On the Eastern side of things, I've studied Ayurveda in Kerala, which is its birthplace. I studied yoga philosophy, I've studied meditation, and so many other spiritual and wellness practices from the East. Now, on the Western side of things, I'm actually historically a science nerd. I studied chemistry and pharmacology at McGill University. I studied biotechnology and business at the University of Pennsylvania, and I have over 15 years of experience in the pharmaceutical industry. So I want you to know that I am not biased in either side, but I've been through a lot of maybe thinking, analysis, experience of how these two marry up. And I think that's really important, because if we lean solely on our current modern science and approaches to things, then we will lose out on wisdom that has been there for thousands of years, that has been, very intelligent and sophisticated in ways that we still can't explain today. And if we only rely on the ancient roots and historical knowledge that we've had, then we will miss out on the advancements and technologies and innovations that have come in modern science. So I feel like if we can live in a way where we can marry the two up, then we can navigate the world in a more holistic way. Okay, so aside from that, let's now get into it. So there are a few ways that we need to think about these two systems. first, from an overall system perspective, how are these philosophies designed? Ayurveda is a more holistic science. It looks at everything in whole, in nature. On the Western side of things, it looks at individual systems. It breaks things down. Ayurveda will break things down, but again, it's more at a constituent level, and it's at the elements level. So if you've heard about Ayurveda, you'll have heard of these things called Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. And Vata, Pitta, and Kapha summarize the 5 elements in nature. So you have earth, wind, fire, ether, and water. And so these get simplified down into 3 factors: Vata, which is more air-like; Pitta, which is more fire-like; and Kapha, which is more earth-like. And then water gets mixed in between, and ether and air get mixed in between. And so Vata, Pitta, Kapha are used as factors, as qualities to describe and understand everything. When we talk about the body, it applies to the body. It applies to these almonds. We can describe almonds in terms of these qualities. And so that's how the systems are broken up. Now, on a Western side, if we think about just from a medicine side of things, health side of things, it looks at individual systems. You'll have your respiratory system, your circulatory system. It looks at symptoms and individual components. And that's how these 2 systems are set up. Now, from a diagnosis perspective, there's differences too. In Ayurveda, we look at something called your prakriti. Your prakriti is your individual makeup. What your prakriti and my prakriti will never be the same. No 2 people will have the same, which is actually kind of similar when you think about your genetic code. But your prakriti is, the way it's determined is based on things like your pulse diagnosis, looking at a combination of all of your factors, and is done in like a holistic way. On the Western side of things, diagnosis is done based on symptoms, based on, for example, your blood levels, your different counts, and it's done on sort of like an evidence-based method. Now, I will say that both of these have their slight downsides. And for example, on the Ayurveda side, the way your prakriti is determined, and your prakriti is basically what are the major doshas that show up for you and define how your body type is and how your body like moves through the world and reacts to the world. So the way that it is diagnosed is usually done with a pulse diagnosis, done with a tongue analysis. There's also all these questions that are done, and they ask about, your health, your lifestyle, and all of this. This often gets reduced to these like 10-question quizzes, like your dosha quiz. And that is often an oversimplification and can very often be wrong because it takes so much more nuance. You need a very trained Ayurvedic doctor who can do a pulse analysis and check your tongue and do all of these things in combination to really understand your prakriti. Now, on the Western side, when we talk about evidence-based methods, if we are diagnosing things just looking at, blood levels or blood counts or metrics, one of the challenges is how is that compared and to what standard? The data that has been collected in medicine over time historically has not been inclusive of all sort of different subtypes of people. For example, people of color, representation of women. A really classic example, which is quite scary, is that women were not included in clinical trials until about the 1970s. That's not very long ago that we have data on women. And often, there are conditions that even if they do represent women, they don't represent women of different ethnicities. And when you come from a different ethnicity, then your levels might be different. What might signal anemia in someone else might signal extreme anemia in someone who comes from a specific ethnic background, for example. So that's how diagnosis takes place in these 2 different systems. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is the approach to, and we'll just talk about medicine because Ayurveda can apply to so many different things and Western science can apply to so many different things. But The approach to treating, now in Ayurveda, looks more at the root cause. It's more like slow prevention. Ayurveda itself means, Ayur means longevity. Veda is knowledge. It's the knowledge of longevity. It's the science of elongating your life. And so that is through daily practices, right? It's through the diet that you eat. It's the practices you do during the day. It's how you eat, when you eat, how you sleep, all of these types of things. Now, on the Western side of things, the approach is actually more acute. And that's a very good thing, because Western medicine is very, very good at emergency medicine. It's very good at intervening in extremes. And it makes a lot of sense because we have a lot of modern problems. We live in a modern world. We've created modern problems, and we have incredible innovations. And not just, I'm talking about pharmaceuticals, I'm talking about health tech, I'm talking about medical devices. There's so many ways that we can intervene. And so when I look at the two systems, one system clearly excels in prevention and maintenance of good health, and another excels very well in terms of intervening acutely when there's an emergency. I've been in situations where, I have Ayurvedic doctors, and, they've said, it's like, yeah, when you're in a car accident, you don't want, like Ayurveda is not really going to help you, or when you have like an extreme infection. I've been through it myself, where I've done all the Ayurvedic treatments and I'm still not better. And the moment I get an antibiotic, I am cleared up and I am good. And, I do think we need to just look at where we can use each one individually. And the really cool thing about this is these two sciences are starting to merge. So the first is, one, if you've heard about the gut-brain axis or the gut microbiome, how in Western science there's a lot of attention on how important it is to have good gut health, and probiotics, prebiotics, probiotics, the whole thing. Now, Ayurveda has talked about the gut for thousands of years. One of the main components in Ayurveda is about, in terms of Ayurvedic eating, is your Agni, and your Agni is considered your digestive fire. So you want to eat according to your digestive fire. You want to eat foods that help you ignite that digestive fire when it's correct, and you want to eat at times that are appropriate for this digestive fire. And so this is where the two of them are starting to meet together, and that's really amazing. And another place where they are coming together is in the area of epigenetics. And if you don't know what epigenetics is, well, first you have your genetics. That's like your genetic code. But you have your genetic code, but then it gets expressed in different ways. It doesn't mean every single marker on your genes will get expressed. It also depends on your environment, and that's the concept of epigenetics. Now, Ayurveda, for again thousands of years, has talked about things like your daily practices, how you approach eating. You don't eat distracted. You don't eat in a distracted way. You eat calmly, meditatively. That energy gets infused into the food that you eat, and that energy comes within, and therefore that food is even more nourishing for you. And Western science is starting to recognize that, hey, it's not just nature, it's also nurture, how you eat your foods and the environments that you grow up in, and this has a really big impact on the genes that gets expressed. A really nice example, I really love this example, there was an experiment done on rats. It was a cholesterol experiment, and all of these rats were fed these foods so that their cholesterol would be higher, that they could then be studied. And there was one particular rat that, even though he was fed the same high cholesterol diet, did not show high cholesterol. And they looked into it further, and the researcher who was responsible for feeding this rat felt really bad that he was giving this rat these like toxic substances. And every day before he would feed them, he would cuddle this rat. He would kind of give like loving petting or kisses or what all, and put this rat in a really loving state. So when this rat was in this in this higher emotional state and consumed this toxic food or however it was delivered to them, the cholesterol levels didn't rise as high as the other ones. And this is such a beautiful example of how the energy that you pour into your food, if you meditate on your water, you meditate on your food, that food will take on a higher quality for you, or the negative qualities of it won't be taken on into you. So all of this to say that there is space for both. You just need to know which lens to look through when, and which tool to pick up at which time, which one makes more sense for whatever situation you're in. I hope this helps you to look at the two sciences, the two systems, with a little bit more of a holistic lens, blending both the modern as well as the Eastern. So I hope this was helpful, and I'll see you in the next episode.